Have you ever heard the expression, not for all the tea in China? It's an idiom that means something very valuable or priceless. It is usually used in a negative sentence to indicate that a person will not do something no matter how much money or benefit they are offered. For another person, that idiom had a whole different meaning. I'm talking about the botanist Robert Fortune. In this story, you'll learn how Robert traveled to China and stole trade secrets of the tea industry. I guess you could say this was the Great British Tea Heist. Welcome to That's Life, I Swear. This podcast is about life's happenings in this world that conjure up such words as intriguing, frightening, life-changing, inspiring, and more. I'm Rick Barron, your host. That said, here's the rest of this story. You know, a lot of us like a nice cup of tea. It's a taste that brings comfort to our taste buds. However, behind the story of a simple cup of tea is a tale of espionage and intrigue. That cup of delicious tea has a complex and dark history. This story of tea is a tale of politics, economics, espionage, and the drug trade. This is a story of one of the most audacious missions ever mounted: to steal the secrets of tea from imperial China. Few figures stand out as prominently in the story as Robert Fortune, whose clandestine expeditions into forbidden Chinese territories fundamentally altered the global tea trade and contributed significantly to the economic strength of the British Empire. Fortune's exploits donning disguises, mastering Mandarin, and penetrating restricted regions of China read like fiction, yet represent one of history's most consequential acts of industrial espionage. His story illuminates the intersection of botany, commerce, and imperial power during the Victorian era, when plants were not merely objects of scientific curiosity, but critical resources of immense economic and political value. Now, we're going to get back to Mr. Fortune in a minute, but let me give you a little historical background that needs to be laid out here. By the mid-19th century, tea had become deeply embedded in British culture and economics. What had begun as an exotic luxury in the 17th century had transformed into a national necessity by Fortune's time. The British Empire's relationship with China was notably unbalanced. British consumers had developed an insatiable appetite for Chinese tea, yet China showed little interest in British goods beyond silver. You see, this trade imbalance contributed to significant economic strain and helped motivate Britain's controversial introduction of Indian opium into China, eventually leading to the Opium Wars in 1839 and also in 1856. Following the First Opium War and the Nanking Treaty in 1842, the British gained access to 5 treaty ports, but were still prevented from traveling inside China's interior. The East Indian Company, though diminished in power after losing its monopoly on Chinese trade in 1833, remained a formidable economic force with expansive ambitions. Now, the company had an idea. They decided on a goal to enhance economic power even more. They recognized that establishing tea production in British India could dramatically shift the financial balance of power, while at the same time reducing dependence on Chinese imports and increasing colonial profits. Enter Robert Fortune. Robert Fortune's first journey to China was not for tea acquisition, but a broader botanical collecting mission. Arriving in Hong Kong in July of 1843, Fortune immediately demonstrated the adaptability and determination to characterize his later missions. His journals revealed a very practical man, untethered by considerable dangers, including anti-immigrant mobs, killer storms in the Yellow Sea, and pirates on the Yangtze River. Most remarkable was Fortune's unusual approach to exploration. You see, rather than traveling openly as a European, he adopted Chinese dress and customs, shaving the front of his head and growing a ponytail. Now, this disguise proved surprisingly effective, allowing him access to regions otherwise closed off to foreigners. His growing knowledge in Mandarin further enhanced his ability to move through Chinese society with reduced suspicion. While his first expedition primarily focused on ornamental plants, Fortune's ability to navigate Chinese culture and geography made him the ideal candidate for a more important mission. Upon his return to England in 1846, the publications of his memoirs, 3 years wanderings in the northern provinces of China, caught the attention of the East Indian Company, which recognized in Fortune the perfect agent for their plan. Robert was approached by the East Indian Company of their idea. Now, at first, he had no interest. However, when told the compensation he would receive, he had a change of heart. Fortune's second expedition to China differed fundamentally from his first in purpose and execution. Commissioned by the East Indian Company, Fortune's mission was nothing less than the following: systematic theft of tea plants, seeds, and the processing knowledge from China's most renowned tea-producing regions. The mission represented an early example, targeted industrial espionage, designed to break China's monopoly on tea production. Now, the risks were considerable. Interior China remained officially closed to foreigners, with severe penalties for those who violated these restrictions. Despite his disguise, Fortune's 6-foot height made his Scottish origins difficult to conceal. Nevertheless, in September of 1848, Fortune again transformed himself into a Chinese traveler, floating on a canal outside Shanghai, with his head shaved and attached a long braid of dark hair hanging onto the nape of his neck. Fortune's subsequent journeys took him to previously unexplored regions, including the famed Wuyi Mountains and the Yellow Mountains, renowned for producing China's finest teas. His disguise, while perfect, proved adequately convincing when combined with his servants' explanations that he was actually the lord of a far-off nation beyond the Great Wall. Fortune's intelligence gathering at Chinese tea factories demonstrated his scientific curiosity and calculated approach to espionage. He had a servant that would precede him, creating elaborate pretexts for his visits to production facilities. Fortune observed and documented the complete tea manufacturing process inside these facilities, from harvesting to drying, rolling, firing, and fermenting. Fortune's discovery of the differing processes for green and black tea production turned out to be very invaluable. You see, European consumers had long believed that green and black teas represented different plant varieties, but Fortune discovered that the distinction lay primarily in processing methods. Black tea underwent an oxidation, fermentation process that green tea did not. Furthermore, he found the unsettling practice of adding colorants to green tea destined for export, including poisonous compounds like Prussian blue and gypsum, to enhance its appearance for Western markets. Fortune's meticulous notes extended beyond processing techniques to cultivation methods, soil conditions, and climate factors. He gathered this intelligence while collecting vast quantities of tea plants and seeds, carefully packed in well-designed Wardian cases, which is another way to say terrarium-like containers, for the journey to India. Perhaps most intriguing, Fortune was very astute in recruiting 8 Chinese tea workers with expertise in cultivation and processing to go with him to India. These men, skilled in the carefully guarded techniques developed over centuries, would provide the intellectual property to British colonial plantations. Their recruitment represented a human dimension to Fortune's espionage, transferring plants and generational expertise from China to British territories. Now, what was the impact of all this? Between Fortune's trips from 1848 to 1851, he had transported over 20,000 tea plants and seedlings to the Himalayan foothills, along with his Chinese tea experts. At first, the immediate results for the processing of these various teas had mixed results. Many plants failed to thrive in the Indian environment, particularly in the northwestern provinces where Fortune had first directed his shipments. This initial disappointment reflected an incomplete understanding of the specific conditions required by Chinese tea varieties. However, the knowledge and techniques Fortune brought proved invaluable when applied to the native Assam tea variety, which had been discovered growing wild in northeast India in the 1830s. While botanically distinct from Chinese tea, the Assam tea variety enormously benefited from applying Chinese processing techniques. Within decades, India surpassed China as the world's largest tea exporter. British colonial plantations in India and later Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, dominated global tea production, fundamentally altering trade patterns established over centuries. Fortune's corporate espionage mission had essentially broken China's monopoly on tea production and transferred substantial economic power to British colonial interests. While tea espionage represents Robert's most historically significant achievement, his broader contributions to botanical knowledge and Western horticulture was substantial. Across his 4 expeditions to East India, 3 to China and 1 to Japan, he introduced over 120 new species to Western gardens and scientific collections. Fortune's later travels to China and Taiwan extended his contributions to include documentations of rice cultivation and silk production. Fortune's achievements exemplify the Victorian era's complex relationship between science, commerce, and empire. From a contemporary perspective, Fortune's missions invite critical examination regarding the ethics of appropriation and exploitation in colonial contexts. While celebrated as enterprising and ingenious in Victorian Britain, his activities fundamentally represented the unauthorized removal of biological resources and traditional knowledge developed over centuries by Chinese cultivators. Fortune's expedition occurred at a historical inflection point when China's traditional isolation was forcibly giving way to European intervention. You see, the First Opium War had recently concluded, with China compelled to grant concessions to Western powers. While less overly violent than military campaigns, Fortune's activities represented another form of exploitation enabled by imperial power. His missions occurred when China's sovereignty was increasingly compromised, and Western powers felt entitled to access China's resources by whatever means necessary. Yet Robert himself appeared motivated not primarily by imperial ideology, but by scientific curiosity and professional ambition. His writings reveal genuine respect for Chinese culture and landscape, even as he systematically gathered intelligence that would undermine Chinese economic interests. Robert Fortune's expeditions to China represent a pivotal moment in global economic history, effectively ending a Chinese monopoly on tea production that had persisted for centuries. Through botanical knowledge, cultural adaptability, and calculated deception, Fortune facilitated a massive transfer of biological resources and traditional knowledge that would reshape global trade patterns for generations. Fortune's story illuminates the intimate connections between botany, commerce, and imperial power during the Victorian era. Plants were never merely objects of scientific curiosity, but key resources with immense political and economic value. Fortune's botanical espionage mission succeeded because the British Empire recognized what China had long understood, that tea represented not just a beverage, but a source of wealth, power, and cultural identity. So what can we learn from this story? What's the takeaway? In the final analysis, Robert Fortune is a classic figure of his age, a man whose scientific passions and professional ambitions align perfectly with imperial interests, enabling activities that would change not just gardens and botanical collections, but the economic fortunes of nations. His legacy reminds us that global history has often turned not just on battles and treaties, but on the movement of plants, seeds, and the knowledge required to cultivate them. Well, there you go, my friends. That's life, I swear. For further information regarding the material covered in this episode, I invite you to visit my website, which you can find on Apple Podcasts for show notes and the episode transcript. As always, I thank you for the privilege of you listening and your interest. Be sure to subscribe here or wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss an episode. And we'll see you soon.